I do think there is something about being able to express in the right context, in the right way, that we are not self-sufficient, and that's the heart of the gospel. But sometimes we're so hard at trying to present a good Christian face that we don't actually show that we're only functional because of Jesus. So I think that's sometimes why, people who have been at the end of their tether are actually better witnesses than people who have kind of got it together, because actually they're demonstrably functioning because of Jesus.
Welcome to Calling Us Into Life, a podcast by Queen's Park Baptist Church in Glasgow, which is in Scotland. Just in case anybody didn't know that. I'm sure everybody does. But this morning we have our usual suspects. Suspect's the wrong word? No? Probably is the wrong word. Are we suspicious? Jack, are you suspicious? Good morning.
I mean, sometimes, maybe. I don't know. I'm now really thinking about that as a phrase and wondering where it came from, but there you go. I'm assuming it didn't come from the film.
No, I'm assuming it predated the film.
The film,
Not sure why.
yeah, okay.
Not sure why.
Answers on a postcard.
Absolutely. Brodie, how are you this morning?
I'm okay. I'm just like, well, have I missed something? Do I behave suspicious, or am I suspicious of others? What suspicious are we talking about, Richard? I'm just confused.
I was just doing an intro. It's as simple as that. That's all it was. It didn't need analysis. But if you've not seen the film The Usual Suspects, you probably should. Well, should
on anyone.
Should's maybe not the right word either.
I may well have seen the film, but I am terrible for knowing what films are called that I am watching and things like that, or who the actors are. I don't care what the actor is in real life. So I may have seen the film. Who knows?
Who knows? Iain, good morning. Favourite film?
Oh, favourite film? That's a real kind of sideways move. Gosh, lots. Paris, Texas is a bit of a favourite for me. Just putting that out there for people to explore. Good.
Well, lots to explore this morning. It was a double header of a service. This previous Sunday, we had a baptism and then we had a sermon. Brodie, you were involved in the baptism. Tell us, it was a bit of a special one, bit different.
It was a bit of a special one. Older lady. We won't say how old she was, but yes. So it was a joy. Baptisms are always a joy, no matter what age or stage the person is at. Just to kind of like, this person was, as tends to be the case, so excited and enthusiastic, and that's great. Though somebody did say, "Oh, are we not doing the Lord's Prayer series anymore?" Yes, we are, but when it's a baptism, it's always a bit of a different preach. So we will be returning to the Lord's Prayer. And it was great. And when we baptise somebody, there's always two people doing the baptism. So Jackie joined me in the tank, which was nice. I think is that the first time you've been involved in a baptism like that, Jackie?
It is. And especially one that took that format, because we did it a little differently.
We did it a little differently. So for those who are kind of like, what are they talking about? Normally we would do baptism by immersion, but because of this person's age and we didn't want to hurt her, we did baptism by effusion, which means that you pour the water over the person.
That's not because baptism normally hurts, you understand. It's not that it's a risky business. There's not like only a 99% chance that you come back up out of the water.
Yeah, no, we've always brought everybody up.
We have a 100% record.
Yeah, there is a physicality to putting the person under water and bringing them back up. And
indeed,
we didn't want to. We erred on the side of caution. Let's say that, and it allowed us to kind of like emphasize some other kind of like images associated with baptism, of being standing under God's grace and His love and being washed clean. Like that. So it was great. It was a good morning.
I think Jack drew either the long straw or the short straw, that she got to take part in a baptism but not get soaking wet herself as well. So I thought that was quite a good strategy. It meant she could sing. You could come back out of the water and then go straight to singing. So Jack had multiple jobs at the weekend. At the end
it was
of
a
the
fun
day.
day.
It was a good day. It was a good day. Iain, you then got to follow this with a preach. As Brodie said, it wasn't on the Lord's Prayer, so why don't you give us a wee intro to what you did preach on?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe just before that, just a quick reflection on a fusion and what it is, if I may, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
I mean, we obviously did it for practical reasons, and I think generally speaking, the church throughout the millennia really has used this as a kind of reserve form of baptism in kind of extreme situations. So people in prison, people who are struggling physically. And just somebody brought this up to me at the weekend, so I thought I'd just kind of pass this on. For those of you who really like ancient documents, the Didache is a very early, I think late 1st century, if I'm right, document on Christian discipleship. It's got all sorts of interesting things in it if you like to know how to manage wandering prophets and when to send them on to the next community. It's got instructions about that, but it has instructions about baptism. And obviously in this, now this is not scripture, but it's just interesting that there's a bit of a hierarchy of modes of baptism that are expressed in this. So the highest mode is baptizing in what's called living water, which is basically a cold stream. So that's kind of regarded as normal, and everything else it's kind of a little bit less than the pinnacle. So if you've been baptized in warm water, you're not quite there, as according to the Didache. But it says if you've no living water, that is running water, baptize into other water. And if you cannot do in cold water, do so in warm. But if you have neither cold nor hot, pour water 3 times upon the head into the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So there you go. That's what we're doing. So in the future, we'll have to go for cold running water as really the pinnacle.
Is there a stream in Queen's Park?
There's
no running water in Queen's Park.
Well,
certainly cold water.
There's running water under Queen's Park, but it's mostly rainwater that's run off, that's excess rainwater. It goes down a great big tube, but that's probably
okay.
We don't want to divert that into the building.
Yeah, I think that's when you do start to get less than 100% success rate at baptising people. It's when you start to force them down tubes underneath Queen's Park.
I think that's when we begin to hurt people, as Brodie is concerned. So.
Yes. I'm also just laughing though because this is like the OG version of cold plunge, which is the biggest craze ever at the moment.
maybe it's suggesting that baptism needs a marketing campaign that cold water swimming. If you want to do the original, as you say, the OG of cold water swimming, come and get baptized.
Sorry, that's where my head went.
Yeah, the church I grew up in didn't have a baptismal tank, so we used the mill pond on the River Gry.
All right, okay.
So we would speak kindly to the local farmer and traipse down, and we would be in one side of the river, and the local youth would be in the other.
I was going to say the shopping trolley.
What we were doing,
being baptised along with a shopping trolley.
No shopping trolleys. Sometimes those that were in the river doing it, there was multiple baptisms, nearly got hypothermia because they were in for quite a long while.
Right, okay.
Everybody else was just in and out.
Iain.
Okay, sorry for that diversion, but
no, not at all.
Some people appreciate these things, I think. So baptism, of course, is just charged with lots of meaning, and one of the positive things for those preaching on a baptismal service is you can take one aspect of what baptism expresses and then kind of look into that. So I was kind of thinking of baptism as being just an expression of God's intervention in our human story and taking just an ordinary life and turning it into something extraordinary by his involvement. So I kind of use the expression that our biographies become testimonies. So our normal lives become infused with God's grace and power. And so sort of from that we looked at a biblical story from Luke 10, a parable of the Good Samaritan. And I just I flipped that story on its head because normally we would position ourselves as being either the priest, the Levite, or the Samaritan. Which are you? Who was a proper neighbour? Are you being a good neighbour? Which is the normal and good interpretation of that. But I thought, what if we look at this from the angle of somebody else in the story? It's quite often a helpful thing to position ourselves in some of these biblical stories. So positioning ourselves as the man who has fallen by the side of the road, that is the one who is in need. What does that mean for us, and how do we find help, and particularly help in coming into a relationship with God in Christ? So a bit of a reflection on our stories, the helplessness of our condition, and the reality of God coming in Christ to rescue us. That was kind of how we took it on Sunday.
So if I could start us off then by talking about our biographies and turning them into testimonies. You talked a little bit on Sunday morning about some of your own personal discoveries about your own history, and an interesting book about your great uncle, which you have discovered recently. And I wondered, just for the sheer joy of it, if you could tell us what it's meant to you to discover more about your family history and what that sort of feels like it means even in relation to your own testimony.
Yeah, it's just really interesting. So this kind of started off because we have been looking as a leadership at our own emotional health and well-being, and looking into our family of origin and our family history. So we were invited to do that and kind of map out in what's called a genogram our family history. And of course, looking at that, we all think, oh, what's negative in my family history? What are the terrible, damaging traits that have reverberated down the generations? And of course, there are things. And so my sister's been doing a bit of family history, so I pinged her a message and she said, oh, I've just found out this and this and this. Now, this is an area of my life where I kind of had a sort of hazy sort of idea. For various reasons, most of my relatives on this side of my family were all really passed away before I was born. So we don't have sort of immediate and direct access. So my sister sort of started throwing a few things out, such as, oh, of course, your uncle was a mate with a guy called Eric Liddell, who was a runner at the 1924 Olympics. Oh, your great uncle was a publisher of Christian books and evangelistic material. And okay, right, okay. So I'm going, not sure about all of that. And she said, well, you just need to read the book. Okay, so in fact, there's a couple of books. So my sister sent me one book that another uncle had published, and then she sent me this book, and of course she started doing some digging, and because my great uncle David was associated with a guy called D.P. Thompson, who in Presbyterian circles is really well known. He was known as Scotland's evangelist, and was really innovative. So digging into this, I discovered that in the 1920s, my great uncle was really pally with this guy when they were at Glasgow Uni, and they started their own evangelistic organisation and publishing company. So he started digging into this. He started realising that here were people who were being really creative about sharing faith in the sort of first half of the 20th century. And then so you begin to think, gosh, it's a really strange thing, because actually I discovered that my other grandfather used to sort of walk about the streets of Glasgow and was married up the road from where we live. And suddenly you kind of realise you have this hinterland of, I don't know, it's almost like you kind of feel, well, I've had 3 generations of people walking these streets proclaiming Jesus. And you kind of think, oh, right, okay, I've got a bit of a heritage and credibility. I'm not just like a new kid on the block kind of thing in my generation. So it just really has given me a sense of heritage. It's really hard to define what it is, but it's just been a real encouragement. And I think I keep looking at the things in this guy's biography, and I'm going, all right, I kind of agree with that, you think, right, so maybe this is where it all comes from.
Yeah, I was just going to say, had your sister been sitting on some of this knowledge for a while and you just hadn't had the conversation, or was it very recent in her own discovery?
No, so I actually had a copy of this book and I read it a long, long time ago, but it didn't really mean an awful lot to me because I didn't kind of tie it to other events. And then she's just really gone into this recently. We keep saying things to my dad and he goes, oh yeah, that's right, the family said this to me and said that to me. Okay, right, thanks very much. So he's kind of, but his knowledge is quite limited as well. So we're kind of filling blanks in for him too.
But your great uncle wasn't living his life anticipating that anyone would write his story. And I think this is the interesting thing for all of us is, as you pointed out on Sunday, it's unlikely that any of us will have biographies written about us. Brodie and Iain, you have far more chance than Richard and I, for sure.
well,
Not sure about that.
Here's the funny thing. So my uncle was really pally with this guy who was the writer. And he wrote books that were really intended to be testimonies and a real challenge to people in Scotland to have faith. He wrote kids' books, and he wrote this biography of Eric Liddell to kind of be an evangelistic impact. And then my uncle died quite young, and his wife was keen that he'd be remembered. So she actually asked him to write the book. She may even have paid him to write the book. So it wasn't because that he was famous or well known. It was simply that his wife wanted him to be remembered and had a friend who was a writer. But at the same time, I think that some of the motivation was, we've written something about somebody who has a bit of fame. And here's somebody who's just simply been obedient, been faithful to God, followed his calling, and would not be known like a lot of people. So it is actually about how God takes an ordinary biography and in the kingdom of God makes this significant. So actually the fact that the book was published is a kind of testimony to the fact of what God can do with somebody who just simply seeks to follow them.
I'll leave 50 quid in a drawer, Jack, and you can employ someone to do like a picture book or something once I've bought my clogs.
Okay.
Idiot's Guide.
This took a turn.
Good stuff. So we then started on the Good Samaritan. Was there which came first, if you like, Iain? The cogitation over the biography stuff that you've been looking at, and then linking it and thinking, actually, baptism, this goes into Good Samaritan, or the Good Samaritan, and then you pulled from your own life some stuff that's going on right now?
I think last week's a long time ago. I think it was just the idea of, thinking about the baptism and the lady who's being baptized, and a story of a life well lived, kind of crowned with this proclamation of faith in Jesus by baptism. So it just, the idea of a story being transformed by the reality of Jesus and his power at work, that was kind of what started. And then I started looking again at this story. I guess it's a story that's been in the back of my head to try and do a sermon on, taking this different view. So it wasn't like the idea of looking at me as the man fallen by the side of the road. It wasn't like that kind of came last week. That's been, it is stolen from a book that I read a long time ago, and from a message that I heard somebody else give. So I kind of had this cooking at the back of my head, and I thought, I'm going to use this sometime. So sometime was Sunday.
Sometime was Sunday. And do you, a question maybe for you both, do you have a note of how many times you've spoken on like the Good Samaritan in the past? Have you got you're looking at that and you've got tally marks in your Bible that you've done this 6 times from different angles?
We've been here before, and Iain's record keeping is just so much better than mine.
Yeah, I would. All of my stuff is just kind of saved on my computer, but stuff that goes back, Richard, kind of pre 2001 or something like that, is a bit dodgy because it hasn't upgraded. And then really prior to maybe, a few years before that, it just is not available because it was on paper. So
index cards. And so is it a favourite passage? Like, is it something you've obviously been mulling over the whole Good Samaritan story for a bit, but is it just one of these parables that always sits at the front of your mind? It's certainly like Good Samaritan is, in the top 3 of things that if somebody was to say, tell me a Bible story. It'd be Good Samaritan, then probably, and I'm going to butcher the names as normal, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and probably, I don't know, what would number 3 be? Maybe the lost coin?
See, I'm not
Gosh.
sure about that, Richard. I wonder if you were to go out into the park, Queen's Park, and ask people, then I suspect lots of people wouldn't know that the phrase "Good Samaritan" comes from the Bible.
Right,
Would be my suspicion. Of For some people, I think in Glasgow certainly you would get a divide of people who have been educated in a Roman Catholic school may well connect to it, whereas like if you went to another comprehensive, chances are folk wouldn't have a Scooby where the term Good Samaritan comes from.
Richard and I were discussing this last night. I'm not sure I've ever heard somebody teach on this passage and talk about imagine being the person that has been beaten and is at the side of the road. Brodie, have you?
I grew up singing a song that nobody else knows, I think, of, so the song is, he poured in the oil and the wine, he poured in the oil and wine, he found me bleeding and dying by the side of the road, and he poured in the oil and the wine. So that's always how I read the story. I noticed I didn't try and sing it, but so, yeah.
That's crazy. I feel, wow. Is this a denomination thing? Was I far less likely to have this version? I'm, the good brethren girl. Is that like? Is that?
No, because the church that I grew up in, it had lots of links with people who had gone to Brethren Church. I don't know where this song comes from, whether it's more kind of like a Pentecostal kind of thing. It had these and thous in it, so it's not a new song, and it was a long time ago. But that, so I kind of like have always grown up with, it's us who are lying on the road, and Jesus is the Good Samaritan who comes along and heals it, or applies first aid or whatever, and looks after it, takes care of it. But Iain's probably right that many times it's common that when this is preached, it's, be like the Good Samaritan, don't be like those who walked by in silence, rather than, mate, you're in a bad state, you need some help and you can't really help yourself.
I'm now going to have to find out about the song, by the way. Side note, I'm going to have to do some research. I want to understand. There's a whole thing going on now.
I'm sure there'll be a version of it on YouTube somewhere.
Need to find it.
A very bad version on YouTube, I predict. Tambourines, synthesizers.
It predates.
I think the point. We're now going so tangential today. I think when you come to that point of reflection, if you were the person who's at the side of the road, it's almost quite humbling, because I don't think we even want to be that person. And it feels like that's the challenge for all of us, is to emotionally get our heads in the place of we're neither the rescuer or the failed rescuers. It's almost like we'd rather be the person who's failing to rescue than being the person needing to be rescued. That's the thing that I was instantly identifying for me as hold up. I don't want to be the helpless person. I don't want to be in need. I don't want to be dependent on another. And I think that just speaks to our self-reliance, Iain. Yeah, assuming it's not just me.
No, I think it's also the way that we generally interpret that text, and we probably are more drawn to being I am the benevolent person with many resources, and I feel better about myself, and I kind of elevate my own dignity by being the one who expresses help and goodness towards others. And that's the way that we preach the story. So, it's no surprise that, our immediate response, unless you've sung the song with Brodie, is to imagine that this is the parable is going to end up with a challenge for you who has resources and has position, to humble yourself and to give yourself. For us, it's not a bad translation, but I think there is something, as you say, that makes us find it more difficult to be the person who is in need, and just to identify with the man by the side of the road.
I think there's something for all of us, isn't there, of realizing, I mean, this was where I was on Sunday maybe, but also our constant need. Obviously, there is a salvation point for all of us. Sometimes it's not even one necessarily identifiable point, but the wider part of being people who are continually in need, I think, is something that was also speaking to me, Brodie.
Yeah, and that's where the in comes in. So St. Augustine read it as humanity is beaten up and on the road, and Augustine kind of like says the inn is not our permanent home, but the inn is the church that cares for us till Christ returns, and then we're in our permanent home. So there's that continual being tended to, that the inn speaks of, and I guess a healing process that takes place. So Iain's drawing on a very ancient reading of the Good Samaritan.
Wow. I had never considered then that it's talking about the church in the context of how the church is meant to support and help and look after and tend to all of us. That's okay. Richard, am I like the last person to get to that, or were you aware of that too?
No, I'm aware of it. It's not. It doesn't sit at the front of my mind when it comes to this particular parable. So it's really interesting to focus on that, especially in, I suppose, at the moment, it's more culturally significant. Like the other is, those that are not like us is very much more a thing of 2024 than it probably was for all of us back 10, 15 years ago. So the whole idea that, we probably have more of an understanding with globalism as to, and with events that are going on just now in Israel, Palestine, as to just the cultural significance of, and it was Iain's kind of final point, that the help turns up, but the help comes from your enemy. I think we're much more aware of that than we have been. The first point I would like to look at, though, is it's made, it's very much brought to the forefront that this is a lawyer asking the question. And I'm curious as to why you think it was necessary in the passage for it to be pointed out that it was a lawyer. A lawyer comes and asks a question about inheritance. Discuss.
Do you know what? I thought Richard might ask a question about that, and then I forgot that was the question. It's the only time I've correctly anticipated a question that you might ask, Richard. But I think, and I haven't kind of got my text up in front of me, but I imagine that, and maybe Brodie can be checking this while I'm talking, but I imagine that we're talking here about a religious leader, who has a particular understanding of the Jewish law. So I don't think we're talking about somebody who's considering conveying property to another generation. I think this is somebody who is asking a question about the right interpretation of Jewish law, which happens, all of the time. Jesus is positioned over and against the religious people who tend to be the ones that come and ask the technical questions. So I think that's what we're really seeing here. I think we're getting somebody who's an expert in the law asking Jesus a technical question about Jewish faith.
So this would be a scribe then, in terms of other New Testament words that would be used for them. Was the question of inheritance a particularly important one for Jewish culture? I mean, normally these questions that come from the Jewish leaders and authorities are loaded. They're like, 9 times out of 10, they're trick questions. They're like, I'm going to trick you into saying X when the Old Testament and the history of Judaism says Y, or interpretation, to try and set themselves against what Jesus is saying? So was inheritance a particular big issue?
I'm not sure, but we're told that this person asked the question to test Jesus. And yet there also seems to be a genuineness, when Jesus responds to him, it strikes him as a bit left field in some respects, but Jesus responds with compassion and care. He's not trying to pass the test, as he were, nor is he dismissing it, but he is concerned about this person, and uses this moment to teach us something. I think the other thing is, inheritance, you've got to be part of the family. So here's somebody who's not part of the family. The Samaritan. Certainly the expert in the law wouldn't have considered this as somebody who would be due an inheritance from Abraham, etc. So you have a shattering of walls and preconceptions about, who is it, who gets this inheritance.
I guess that's where my question is coming from. Is if this was a test, what was the test? Like, what did failing the test look like to this lawyer? And did how Jesus answered, as often happens in the parables, just turn the topsy-turvy kingdom. It turned it on its head, which obviously about the Samaritan it did. Iain?
I think there must be something around compliance to the faith practices of Israel. What are the appropriate ways in which you function? Though Jesus kind of points back to the heart of the law, doesn't he, about loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, and your neighbour as yourself, which is actually a higher bar than just finding agreement and alignment with the Jewish teachings. So I think for a lot of people, compliance with what was the markers, the processes by which you indicated your Jewish faith, I think that would have been the kind of answer he was looking for. So is Jesus within Judaism? Is Jesus asking people to break with the traditions? And Jesus actually goes back to the core tradition from which a lot of the kind of law in essence would have sprung, which is actually about the heart, and asking kind of impossible questions of, is your heart holy completely, not just in your external expression, but is it wholly committed to God, and is that manifest in how you conduct yourself with other people? So I mean, my kind of take on that was, well, really, if you see compliance with God's character and God's life as being a wholehearted commitment to God and to loving our neighbours, then we all fall short of that. So part of the story, in my kind of interpretation, was that nobody actually is meeting that kind of a standard. If that's how you characterize the law, then we're all failures. If that's kind of what God asks of us, then we all fall short, and therefore we all identify not with the law keeper like the Levite or the priest, but we actually are more like the guy who is by the side of the road, which, having been beaten up, not only has he lost resources, but there's this sense of being spiritually or religiously polluted. He is somebody who the priest and the Levite walk by. Why do they walk by? Well, their concern, I would suggest, is that they fear being contaminated, which would disallow them from continuing to minister in the temple. So they perceive this guy to be spiritually beyond the pale, and therefore somebody who isn't a true Israelite, or someone who isn't compliant with the law. And yet that's the person that the Samaritan goes to and restores.
Yeah. And there's the element there not just of being rejected, if you like, as a person lying the side of the road by your leaders, but also by your family members, because these people are fundamentally family. They're Jews, so they're part of the same family, but also these people are leaders within that family, and yet somebody from a different family, from a different background, different culture, different set of beliefs, that is the one that actually comes and digs the person out of the bother that they found themselves in.
Yeah, I think there's something in that I'd suggest about the crossing of all of those barriers that limit relationships. So here are people who are, as you use the word others, here are people from a community who have been separated by faith, separated by ceremonial purity or lack of it, and yet there's a crossing of those barriers, which I again kind of made reference to the fact that that's what Jesus does for us, that he breaks across the barriers of separation that separate us from life in him, and really the whole story of the incarnation and the crucifixion is characterized by God breaking through into an environment which is hostile, an environment which is unholy, an environment into which he should not be present, and yet, like the Samaritan, he crosses the barriers and he breaks the walls that would separate us from him. So I think it does. I think when you set it up as here are people who shouldn't be connected to each other, here are people who are divided by religion, then it presents again just a characterization of what God has done for us in Christ in crossing hostile territory in order to not only connect with us, but to connect with us in order to restore and to heal us.
Well, a good spot to take a slight intermission because the Transforming event that we'll be hosting soon, I suppose, is all about linking our culture and society, I suppose, as church, with everything else that's actually going on in the world. Iain, give us a quick pitch as to what's happening and how can folk get tickets to get along?
Yeah, so I would suggest that there's a real challenge in our culture, perhaps our global culture these days, about how we know what is true, how we understand the information that we're being fed through the media, what we do about that, and even how media itself makes those decisions and choices. And for many of us, that's expressed in those kind of talking shops, interview programs, discussion programs. The flagship discussion program, I guess, in many ways on BBC is Question Time on a Thursday night. So we have Gerry Gay with us, who is the editor of Question Time. So his task is to ensure that the conversation is fair as much as is possible, and he's going to be talking just about that public conversation and the role of media in shaping conversations that are at least based on some desire for truth. Actually, interestingly for people, Question Time will come from Glasgow this Thursday night, and then we'll have him on Friday night. So I'm hoping that everybody's going to be just really on it, really wound up, really ready to engage with all their questions. It's going to be a little bit more interactive than normal. He's a pretty robust guy, so that really difficult question that you've been shouting at the TV about how Question Time is being edited, he is prepared to take that one on. So please feel free. You might not get the answer you want, but you will get an answer. So it's going to be, I think it's going to be really good from that point of view. To get tickets, Richard, just go on the QP website, follow the links that are there, £10 a head, and you get something to eat as well.
I was just going to say, I don't envy his job at all, because I'm mostly banned from watching Question Time in our house. It doesn't lead to a relaxed evening, I just wanted to say.
The Incredible Hulk thing about you'll not like it when I'm angry. Anyway, good stuff. Right, let's quickly do an off topic and then we'll get back on the topic for today. I'm going to go first. If you're just looking for a podcast that's, it's not that it's inappropriately funny, but if you've been involved in youth work, you know how these stories work. Okay, it's maybe an American culture, so there's slightly more Americanism about it, but if you want to listen to something that's just going to make you have a bit of a laugh, check out the Youth Group Chronicles as a podcast. It's just the mad, crazy things that you can only imagine American youth groups might get themselves involved in, and people reacting to that. It's very, very funny. So go and check out Youth Group Chronicles. Brodie, an off-the-topic cultural reference, anything you like?
Cultural reference. So I reached out to somebody on X, as it now is. If you read anything around kind of like suffering from a theological point of view, invariably the author will reference a scene from the brothers Karamazov. So I've read this scene several times, but I never read the brothers Karamazov. So I reached out to Brian Zand, because I know that he's a fan, and said, listen, there's a new translation out. What translation should I get? So he responded and told me what translation of Brothers Karamazov to get. So that's my current reading. I didn't realise it was 900 pages long.
I was going to say, it's not a quick read.
No, it's not a quick read. And
City of God, Brothers Karamazov, which one should we weigh? Which one should we weigh? Iain?
Yeah, personal confession, I did a negative critique of that book for my English teacher when I was at school, and he told me, you really, Dostoevsky, you don't actually critique and complain and say negative things about it, or you'll not get any marks in your exam. So that's as far as I got with it. Shout out, Celtic Connections is on in Glasgow. For people, we always like to go to one or other or many of the Celtic Connection concerts in Glasgow. So that's my kind of shout out for something cultural.
Good stuff. Jack?
Well, I have a little bit of a funny story, if you'll all indulge me. So on Saturday, I was vacuum cleaning. I nearly said hoovering, but that's incorrect. I was vacuum cleaning, and I managed to catch the cable for our internet and broke the internet, which was really popular.
For everybody, so if you've all been suffering internet outages, it was Jack breaking the internet.
So I broke the internet, and it was going to be Monday before it was fixed. So we found ourselves without television, obviously, and we ended up doing a jigsaw on Sunday night, which was wonderful because I really enjoy jigsaw. But if you'll all just allow me, I felt God saying something to me about the jigsaw. So this is my lessons from a jigsaw, a few very brief points. The piece you're looking for often doesn't look how you would imagine it looks. Don't obsess over the piece you're trying to find or the place where you're stuck. Often you will find that piece when you've moved on to another part of the jigsaw. Keep referring to the big picture. It's very possible that you've lost perspective. And finally, it's not the race to finish it. The joy is in the process. So there you go. That was my lessons from a jigsaw from the weekend.
That's brilliant, Jackie. I was going to jump in as well. I had this, and you reminded me to kind of say this, but I have a friend who I meet up every now and then, and he's a really good friend to a lot of people. But the one thing he's particularly good at, and it's always a challenge to me, is that he usually prays and asks God for a word before we meet up. And he had done it this time and I hadn't, so confession time. But the word that so he said to me, he said, sometimes you hear God and sometimes you see God in the things that are around you. So he said, I was driving along the road and he said, I was asking God, what do you want to say to Iain? And he said, I then looked at what was happening on the road and he said, God spoke to me through what I saw rather than what I heard. So that is a real kind of encouragement to people to just kind of look out at what you're seeing and say, God, what you're trying to say. And believe it or not, God can speak to you through the A77. So there you go. So that's one for you guys, because you're not far from the A77. So who knew it was a prophetic road?
Exactly. Maybe he's just telling you to turn right when you get near Fenwick and come in for a cup of tea.
No, the point is, he made the point that there's there's roadworks on near your part of the road, and there's a lane blocked, and that was part of the word.
All right, okay, cool, very good. Right, let's get back to the passage. So, Iain, one of your points was about a man being in need of help, and we are helpless to help ourselves. I'm sure we could delve long and hard into the number of times we've tried to help ourselves and failed miserably when really what we required was to reach out to others. I think the beyond help is maybe what I'd like to have you speak into some. Just there seem to be a load of folk, and all of us, I think, find ourselves from time to time in a position whereby we feel simply like we are beyond help.
I think this story brings us just real encouragement. I think this is one of the wonderful things about the gospel, that that our need, our need creates the opportunity for God. And so, to be in need is not to be in a kind of dead end that we are unable to come out from, but it creates an opportunity for God to speak and to move. I was struck by, it's really the title of a book by the author Brené Brown, who talks about the gift of imperfection, and actually the way in which our helplessness and the way in which something that is imperfect or broken can actually become a gift to us. So I think it's one of the things maybe to remind ourselves is that place of helplessness can actually be a place of gift. It can be given to us as an opportunity to reach out and receive what God has for us, or maybe just to be open to something different happening, and to see that God actually is available to us and seeks to work in our lives when we are, and when we admit that we are in need.
Brodie, this is more a statement than a question, but our culture celebrates self-reliance. I don't mean church culture, I mean like world culture celebrates self-reliance. And it felt to me at the weekend that there was just that piece about not wanting to confess our brokenness as often being the thing that's our stumbling block to actually having help in the first place, because as people we seem to be so concerned about presenting people that have got it together, that we're doing well. We don't like to confess those parts of need within our own lives.
Yeah, I think that's true. And there's a challenge to how we do that well, isn't there? Because there can be kind of like, oh, poor me kind of thing. Look at poor me. And I'm sure there is a place for sharing our vulnerabilities and being vulnerable, but the core of the story here is our need to realize our need for God's help. I cannot save myself. I cannot, create a mechanism where through my effort and my works, I can inherit eternal life. I need a rescuer. I need somebody to do that for me. And I think that's one of the big challenges, that does our pride stop us from coming to God? And as a wider society, is to use the farming metaphor of pride hardens the ground for the seed of the gospel, or our self-reliance. So even if, we're in a total mess, people are reluctant to turn to God. And I guess there's a challenge for us as church of, does the church view, or does the world view the church as people who know the Good Samaritan, that we are friends with the Good Samaritan, as it were, or do they view us as those religious people that were indifferent or scared or too off?
I think maybe just even to kind of follow that up, I think there's always a pressure to perform within us, and that we think we need to be a good witness, and if our lives are failing or made a mistake, that's a bad witness. And I do think there's something about being able to express in the right context, in the right way, that we are not self-sufficient, and that's the heart of the gospel. But sometimes we're so hard at trying to present a good Christian face that we we don't actually show that we're only functional because of Jesus, and he is the reason. So I mean, I think that's sometimes why people who have been at the end of their tether are actually better witnesses than people who have kind of got it together, because actually they're demonstrably functioning because of Jesus, and that is very clearly the difference. But I think sometimes we mask the difference that Jesus makes by trying to be a good witness, and that's what I'm trying to say.
I think as well, it's worth acknowledging that no matter how mundane we feel it is, this is coming back to where you started, no matter how mundane we feel our story is, our biography is, the testimony and legacy that he's creating in all of our lives is precisely because of our brokenness, not despite it. Would that be fair?
I think it's what God is doing in our brokenness. I think our God isn't using our sin or our failure to kind of promote himself, but I think it's what God does in those moments. It's the grace of God that our brokenness creates the opportunity for, that actually reshapes and gives the testimony and the story, doesn't it?
And I think lots of people have used the picture of it's kinzuki, pottery, Japanese pottery that has been broken and is then put together with like gold as the glue, and something beautiful is created from that. And God takes our brokenness and creates beauty from it, and beauty not perhaps as the world defines it, but a beauty in that vulnerability, in which he speaks of God's goodness and God's grace and God's life and his healing. And I think it's learning how to share those stories, and looking for opportunities to share those stories of God at work and God doing something and changing something, and maybe even just for those of us who've been Christians for a long time, I sometimes do this, think of what would I be like if Jesus wasn't in my life. I've got some ideas.
Prison.
Pardon? Prison.
Prison.
Yeah, possibly.
Is that for you?
I'm not. Yeah, for me, I'm not speaking into Brodie's life.
Yeah.
I mean, or maybe, I don't know.
I don't think it would be a very nice person, is the honest truth. I think it'd probably be a very angry, kind of like confrontational person. And to think of the difference that Jesus has made in our lives, of the change that he has brought, and to look for opportunities to share our testimony.
Cool. Well, our hour is nearly done, but Iain, one of the final points you made, which we touched on earlier, was about help turning up, but it's your enemy. So a final question: how long do you think it took the injured party to get over the fact that it was his enemy helping? Like, do you think it was like, yeah, okay, that's fine, I don't care that you're a Samaritan, like very quickly, or do you think it took quite a while? And reflect on that, about how quickly we either should or do the same thing in our own lives.
And there it is, folks, the impossible question. Yeah. I mean, clearly in the parable, I don't know if he's got much capacity to respond anyway. I think the guy's bleeding out, isn't he? So, when you get to that desperate, you take help from anywhere, which I think is part of the point of the parable. So my guess is it's a pretty quick kind of thing, but whether the guy was that conscious of what was going on or who was doing it, I don't really know.
That's interesting, is that was his what's the word I'm looking for? Like, did he have the ability to refuse the help, in a sense that so the help simply wasn't offered and wasn't asked for from the other parties, but it was actually all on the Samaritan's basis? It was 100% him responding to the situation, and the injured party had very little to do to do with it until after the event, till he woke up with all his bills paid for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a whole podcast in and of itself about what we contribute to our salvation and what is the work of God, and I'm sure we could mention Mr. John Calvin in relation to all of this. I think it's really hard to say, Richard. I think the point is, let's remember it's a parable, and we can't just extract every last microgram of juice from it. The point I think that is being made is, here is somebody who is helpless, unable to help himself, and pretty much unable to contribute anything perhaps beyond a nod or allowing his body to slump into the arms of the guy who was saving him. So I think very little from his point of view. I doubt he could have had much energy to resist, but when you're at the end of your tether, probably everything within you is welcoming any kind of help, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the emphasis of the story is on the actions of the Good Samaritan rather than the guy who's lying injured. Again, I very much doubt that he's got much awareness of what's happening, and it's the innkeeper that then looks after. So, yeah, I don't know that that's the point that we're meant to take, particularly, because the point of the story is that Jesus is our unexpected help, but when we think on it, he's not an enemy, is he? So the question is, do we refuse? Do we ignore our brokenness and refuse the help of Jesus? Am I aware that I am bleeding and dying on the Jericho road? That's the key thing. That's the message to the expert in the law. You're bleeding and dying on the Jericho road. You need intervention. You need help.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining us. We will go round my screen as it sits in front of me to get some final words. But before that happens, do recommend the podcast to a friend, send them a link, leave us a review, give us 5 stars, send us a question. Send us a question, office@qpbc.org, or on Spotify. If you happen to be listening on that app, you can leave a question or a comment directly on the app if you just scroll down the page on the app to which you're listening to this on. But let's get some final words. So first up, Jack.
Oh gosh, I knew you were going to ask me when I've not quite formulated it in my head. I think it would have to be something about not allowing my pride to be something that gets in the way of me being helped when I need help. That my acknowledgement, I don't want to have to get to the end of myself before I acknowledge that I am in need of help and that I need God to rescue me on a daily basis.
And that jigsaws are always better with 2.
Also true.
Excellent. Brodie?
You may be a regular listener to the podcast, or you may have stumbled across it, but we all need Jesus. And if you are listening to this and going, I'm intrigued, but I don't know Jesus the way that they're talking about the Good Samaritan tending to the guy on the road. Maybe I'm the person on the road. Then contact us, get in touch. We'd love to chat about that more. We started off the pod by talking about baptism. Again, if that's something that you'd like to find out more about, the email address for questions for the podcast works for it. I'd like to find out more about baptism, office@qpbc.org.
And we can combine it with a cold water swim if that's really your thing. I'm sure there might be some liturgical reason not to do that, but there we go. Iain, you preached it, so final word to you.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Brodie has said, and I think that says pretty much everything. Just want to add one little thing to that, which is that imperfection is a gift, and if we choose to step into that areas of helplessness, areas of our own brokenness, then we will encounter the God of grace, who is always coming along the road to meet us and to touch us and transform us.
Excellent. And on that note, have a great week. Speak to you all again soon. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.